Some friends of mine recently gave me a suggestion for something that I should attempt to build. It's an epic moment from the TV show X-Men '97. In it, Gambit runs toward a seemingly unstoppable three-headed Sentinel, and just as he approaches it to strike, it defeats him. Or so it appears. But in reality, Gambit had one more card up his sleeve, and the Sentinel fell right into its own demise. Now in contact with the Sentinel, he's able to convert all of its potential energy into kinetic energy and cause it to self-destruct. It's an epic moment of sacrifice and victory from Gambit, and it's the moment that I'm going to be recreating today. How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Boil Hobby Time. I started this build with a material that I've only used once or twice on this channel, and that is Cosplay Foam. I actually believe it's called EVA foam, but it's what I decided to attempt to make the Sentinel out of for this project. I found a template online for how to make flat things into a dome and began cutting out the shape of it. I used a ruler to make parts of it precise, but for the rest I eyeballed it and hoped for the best. After cutting all the straight lines and all the sections out between the leaves, I started heating the foam and bending it into shape. And while the dome itself was shaping up nicely, my eyeballing of the size of the dome was completely wrong. I don't know what I was thinking. Luckily, I had a little foam ball on hand that was the right size, and the only thing you need to turn a ball into a dome is 1/2 less of the ball. I did that using my hot wire table. And don't worry, the work that went into making that oversized kippa will not be lost. I will be able to recycle it later in the video. For now, it was time to start constructing the helmet of the Sentinel from the smaller dome. I used a photo reference and broke down the shapes that I saw into different pieces of EVA foam. And you can typically get away with using normal superglue on this stuff, but because I was gluing it to the foam dome, which is styrofoam, I needed to use some super gold, which I usually refer to as foam-safe superglue. I'm not sure of the anatomy of a Sentinel. Like this piece here, is it an extension of the chin or a part of a removable helmet? I'm not sure. But either way, it reminded me of many different things as I was building it, and I will call each of those out as I see them. And as it reminds you of different things, you should leave those comments below. To start with, the face really reminded me of the Transformers logo as I was cutting it out. And then as I assembled it, it gave me a little bit of Alphonse Elric with a scooter helmet. To help mitigate some of the foam ball texture on the top, I covered the foam in multiple layers of Mod Podge. While this didn't get rid of it entirely, it did help quite a bit. And while I was working on that, my 3D printer was working on Gambit, who I designed on Hero Forge. I printed him off in a few different sizes, and this one definitely looked the closest to me. I then began working on the neck of the Sentinel, and I really did want to be able to make this a true three-headed Sentinel, but I didn't have time or the materials necessary for it to work. I could have gotten another foam ball, and I had plenty of EVA, but the most important ingredient were the pink LED noodles. I ordered more than I thought I needed, and I ended up using almost all of them for just the one-headed Sentinel. So 3 would have been impossible. I guess not impossible, but I would have had to wait at least another month before the filaments arrived from China. Once the neck had Mod Podge, the construction was done. And you may be looking at this thinking it's not detailed enough, but there are 2 good reasons for this. One is that every detail needed to be outlined with filament. Like I said, I barely had enough. And 2, this isn't a very detailed character to begin with. To make things easier on myself later on when it comes time to run the filaments, I used a Dremel to route some shallow channels for them. They won't snap into them or anything, but I will need to use fewer anchor points, which will be very helpful. And speaking of anchor points, Gambit needed to have one drilled into his side, unfortunately. With the characters basically done, it was time to start painting. I took the skeleton in a Lego helmet outside and gave it a coat of red, a very red. But before proceeding with the painting, I decided to take a little break and make the tentacle arm that does the stabbing of Gambit. I used a nice sturdy rod from K&S Precision Metals that I bent into the correct shape that will put Gambit right between the eyes of the Sentinel. I then sliced up a tube of clear heat shrink into little rings, which I will use to hold the filament onto the rod, which will act as a conduit to get power to the far end of the filament. Once all those had been shrunk, I moved back to the Sentinel, and while I paint this thing, I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons. Instead of getting frustrated doing a lot of brush painting and wasting time going back and cleaning up the lines, I got frustrated doing a lot of taping and wasting a lot of time going back and retaping when I had done it incorrectly. All of this was to save time using the airbrush. I painted the neck and shoulders purple, then removed the first round of tape, and I felt like I was revealing Squidward's new chiseled face as I peeled off these bandages. I then added another round of tape to protect everything that wasn't the face from being painted the same color as the face. And this step right here reminded me of Jack of the Dust in his videos where he paints skull sculptures. And when he peels off the masking tape, it's always so satisfying. When the last of the tape had been removed, I went back with black in the airbrush to soften the transitions and give the recessed areas some shading. While this step did add a lot to the overall appearance, the final thing that really did it for me was the white chipped highlights. Now all of my mistakes look like weathering. And finally, it was time to paint Gambit. His paint job was pretty straightforward. He got a white suit, black shoes, the skin on his face and hands needed to be painted. He got red hair and lots of blood. Now the poor guy is ready to be a hero. With the painting done, it was now time for the part of the build that I had been dreading, and that was adding the lights. This section alone took me 7 hours. And I wish that I could have been able to stretch this out and make a nice long video out of it, but it was just the same thing over and over. And most of the extra footage would have bored you. It would have bored me, for that matter. The process that I kept repeating was to drill a hole, string the filament, add some heat shrink, and glue it in place. To give the Sentinel its nice round eyes, I took 2 smaller flexible filaments and rolled them into a loop, connecting them with a bit of heat shrink. The silicone that coats the filaments themselves does not hold or stick to much, but the heat shrink that grabs onto it nicely does. I had an absolute mess of wires inside the head, so I cleaned that up and got all the negatives and positives separated into 2 clusters. And to prevent any unnecessary time waste and frustration, I tested everything as I went. I did the same thing for the neck, and when that was done, I could thread all of the wires through the neck from the head and connect the 2 pieces together, and my neon Sentinel was finally done. The next step was to grab the base and get all of the electronics figured out. I installed battery housing. I followed that with a nice big hole for those wire clusters. I didn't want them to be bunching up underneath the Sentinel, making it sit unlevel. I used a hot glue gun to secure the Sentinel in place, and then I painted the base with black 3.0. I played around with the idea of adding more things to the base, like maybe some ruined buildings, or painting it like the rubble beneath, but in the end I decided, so as not to distract from the Sentinel and Gambit, painting it all black was just fine. After the black paint had dried, the last thing to do was to glue Gambit in place. And after that, I called it good. Before moving on to my final shots, please take a moment to look through all the awesome submissions sent in by my patrons for the monthly art challenge, the theme of which was hazardous work environments. Thanks again to everyone who participated last month.
The name's Gambit, mon ami.
That is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Huge shout out as always to my patrons. You guys are the best. And thank you to Matt, Noah, and Jack for suggesting today's build. Have a great week, everyone. I'll see you next time.
Remember it.